There are people who grew up thinking their childhood was completely normal, until adulthood started hurting in very specific ways. Not dramatic pain, not obvious trauma, just strange patterns. Patterns that quietly shape your relationships, your self-worth, your anxiety, even the way you sit in silence when nobody is texting you back. And the hardest part is most people carrying emotional neglect don't even realize anything happened to them. Because emotional neglect is not always loud. Sometimes nobody screamed at you. Nobody hit you, nobody abandoned you. You had food, you went to school, your family looked fine from the outside, but emotionally something was missing, not violence, presence. The kind of presence that makes a child feel emotionally safe, seen, understood, wanted. And when a child grows up without that emotional connection, the brain adapts in quiet ways, not as memories. As habits that feel so normal you mistake them for personality. You think, this is just who I am. But sometimes, who you are is actually survival mode that never turned off.
What if I said the wrong thing?
And once you see it, you can never unsee it again. One of the biggest signs is this: you constantly explain yourself, even for tiny things. You don't just say, I'm busy. You say, sorry, I've just had a lot going on lately and I didn't want you to think I was ignoring you. You over-explain your decisions, your boundaries, your emotions, even your preferences, as if existing without justification feels dangerous. And most people think this means you're polite or thoughtful. But psychologically, this often comes from growing up in environments where your emotions were questioned, dismissed, or misunderstood. Children naturally believe their feelings matter, until repeated experiences teach them otherwise. So they learn something dangerous: if people misunderstand me, I could lose connection. And eventually they start managing everyone's perception constantly, not because they're fake, because they're afraid of being emotionally rejected for being themselves. That's why over-explaining feels less like communication and more like self-protection. Another sign is harder to notice. You feel uncomfortable when people are kind to you, not obviously uncomfortable, just suspicious. Someone compliments you and your first instinct is to reject it. Someone helps you and you immediately feel guilty. Someone loves you consistently and part of you waits for them to change. Because emotionally neglected children often grow into adults who learned one painful rule very early: love is inconsistent, attention disappears, warmth changes suddenly. Support becomes unpredictable, so the nervous system stops trusting good things fully. Even happiness can feel unsafe. That's why some people sabotage healthy relationships without understanding why. Chaos feels familiar, calm feels suspicious, and the body will always choose familiar over healthy until awareness interrupts the pattern. Here's another pattern people rarely talk about. You feel emotionally alone, even around people. You can be surrounded by friends, family, messages, conversations, and still feel disconnected, because connection is not physical proximity. It's emotional safety, and if you grew up in a home where emotions were ignored, minimized, or emotionally rushed, you may have learned to stay physically present while emotionally hiding. You became easy, independent, low maintenance. The child who never asked for too much, but emotionally, you stopped expecting anyone to truly understand you. So now even when people care about you, part of you still feels alone. Not because nobody loves you, because vulnerability never became safe enough for your nervous system. And that changes the way you connect with everyone. You start saying things like, I don't want to bother anyone, or it's not a big deal, even when it is. Because minimizing your pain became automatic, not honesty, protection. And the scary part is people praise this version of you. They call you mature, independent, strong. But sometimes being strong was just the inability to safely depend on anyone. That's not strength, that's adaptation. And adaptation can become a prison when the danger is gone but the survival strategy stays. Another sign of emotional neglect is this constant feeling that you're behind in life. Even when objectively you're doing okay, you compare yourself constantly. You feel guilty for not doing enough. You struggle to feel proud of yourself for long, and no achievement fully fixes it. Because emotional neglect creates a deep internal emptiness that accomplishment cannot fully reach. Why? Because children don't build self-worth alone. They borrow it first from emotionally attuned caregivers, from being emotionally mirrored, seen, encouraged, validated, comforted. That's how a child slowly develops, I matter. But when emotional support is missing, the child often grows into an adult constantly trying to earn the feeling of enoughness through success. Productivity, people-pleasing, perfectionism,
I'm sorry.
but no amount of
Wait, why
achievement
did I just say
heals
that?
emotional deprivation by itself, because the wound was never about performance. It was about emotional connection. And maybe that explains something you've secretly felt for
Actually, I
years,
can't make it this
why your
time.
victories
Thank you for
feel
asking.
emotionally
Oh, okay.
quiet,
No worries at
why
all.
rest
Maybe next
feels
time.
uncomfortable, why your mind never fully stops scanning for what's wrong. Because survival mode is exhausting, but it becomes addictive when it's all your nervous system has known. And if this is resonating deeply with you right now, subscribe. Not because this channel will magically fix your life, but because sometimes the first step in healing is finally having language for what you've been carrying silently for years. And most people never get that language. Another overlooked sign is this: you struggle to identify what you actually
You're
need,
fine.
not what others need. You're amazing at that, but your own needs. That question almost feels blank. What do you want? What do you feel? What would make you happy? And suddenly your mind goes quiet. Because emotionally neglected children often become hyper-focused on other people's emotions while disconnecting from their own. Their attention turns outward for survival. They monitor moods. Tone changes, facial expressions, energy shifts, because reading the emotional environment became necessary. But over time, they stop reading themselves. And adulthood becomes confusing because you know how to function, but not always how to feel fulfilled. You know how to survive, but not always how to emotionally exist. And maybe the deepest sign of all is this: you feel guilty for having emotional needs in the first place. You tell yourself other people had it worse. It wasn't that bad. My parents tried their best, and maybe they did. This is important to understand. Emotional neglect is not always about bad parents. Sometimes it's emotionally unavailable parents, overwhelmed parents, emotionally immature parents. Parents who were never emotionally cared for themselves, but intent does not erase impact. A child can be loved and still emotionally unseen. Both things can be true. And the moment many people finally realize this, everything starts making sense. Not to blame, but to understand,
You always
because
do this.
healing
I can't
becomes
believe you are bringing that up
possible
now.
only after
Because you never take
awareness.
responsibility for anything.
You
I always
cannot
do this. Why
change
am I saying it's all
patterns
my
you
fault?
still
When did you
call
just like blame everyone
personality,
in conflicts?
and none of
Everything
these
wasn't wrong in the
habits mean you're
situation.
broken. In fact, most of them were brilliant survival strategies. You adapted to environments your younger self did not have the power to escape. You became hyper-aware because unpredictability trained you to be. You became independent because relying on others felt unsafe. You became emotionally quiet because your feelings had nowhere to go. Your nervous system learned exactly what it needed to survive that environment. The problem is, your adult life may no longer require the same armor, but your body still wears it. That's why healing often feels strange at first. Rest feels uncomfortable. Healthy love feels unfamiliar. Being emotionally honest feels risky, because healing is not just learning new
Honestly, I fell
behaviors.
on its stuff. See that? It's just been a lot.
It's teaching
I'm
your
finally
nervous
letting it all out.
system that the
Thanks for
danger
being
is
here.
over, and that takes time, not motivational quotes, not pretending you're fine, not one productive morning routine. Real healing usually starts very quietly, by noticing the apology that wasn't necessary, noticing the guilt after resting, noticing the fear of asking for help, noticing how quickly you abandon your own feelings to take care of someone else's. Awareness changes patterns, because once you can finally see the survival strategy, you get a choice. And maybe for the first time in your life, you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What happened to me emotionally?" That question changes everything. Because some of the behaviors you hate most about yourself were once the exact behaviors that helped you survive, and your younger self deserves compassion for that, not shame. So before you leave, I want you to think honestly for a second. Which of these patterns felt the most personal, not intellectually, emotionally? Because the pattern that hurts to recognize is usually the one that has been controlling your life quietly for the longest time. And the moment you can name it, the moment you can finally see it clearly, is often the exact moment healing truly begins.